Haid al-Jazil. Yemen has no lakes or rivers, so the only way for people to get water is from seasonal river valleys called wadis that come and go. Because of this, over the years, people have built towns and villages high up on the rocks to take advantage of these water sources. Haid al-Jazil is a village in central Yemen's Wadi Hadramaut region that sits on a giant 328-foot-tall rock overlooking a dry and deserted valley below. Just don't stand too close to the edge. This magical town dates back at least 5,000 years and is filled with narrow streets and mud brick homes. While homes made from mud brick might sound primitive, the structures were very versatile and helped to control the temperature. Only 17 people live here now, 10 from the same family, and there is no school, no hospital, and no stores. Out of 45 houses there, only about 30% are habitable, with most having fallen into disrepair due to heavy rains, erosion, and a lack of maintenance. Haid al-Jazil is extremely isolated. The tough roads that lead there require an off-roading vehicle, and the nearest hospital is an hour's drive away. Anyone who manages to reach the village must park their car at the bottom of the mountain and trek up a cobblestone road. The quality of life there has improved over the years, according to a resident who told a reporter that his home has electricity from 6 p.m. to 5 a.m. daily, as well as running water. He is hopeful that if the roads are repaired and expanded, that people might come back to live in this magical village. Castel Del Monte. Castel Del Monte, or Castle of the Mountain, is a 13th century castle and citadel located in southeastern Italy's Apulia region. Situated on a hill in the city of Andria, it was built during the 1240s by Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II. The most unique mystery about this castle is its emphasis on the number 8 and the geometric octagon. It's famous for its octagonal geometric design with an octagonal tower at each corner, rumored to be built based on measurements with hidden meanings that are said to hold secrets or codes. It is not in a strategic position and it lacks both a moat and a drawbridge, which was characteristic of the time. It was never intended as a defensive fortress in the first place. So why did the Holy Roman Emperor decide to build this? Inside, it contains 2 floors with 8 rooms each and an 8-sided courtyard. Scholars have found astronomical symbols, and there are many details that probably were meant to hide something deeper. Hundreds of years ago, the castle was surrounded by a dense forest, which would have kept it hidden from outsiders. There are many stories of ghosts said to roam the castle, men who were killed here, or servants or prisoners who died, unable to make the transition and get out of its walls. Legend goes that spirits have been wandering here for centuries. Others say it is the soul of Frederick II, who does not want to leave his beloved castle. Officially, this place was said to be Frederick's hunting lodge, but unofficially there are rumors that the castle was built for a much more spiritual purpose. The castle was built on top of a Benedictine monastery that was there long before, which may have influenced its shape. The octagonal plan is the geometric shape closest to the circle, which is the representation of the union of the earth with the divine. So perhaps the shape and function of the castle was more for God than for hunting. Perhaps Frederick II met in secret here with the Knights Templar, but since he died soon after the castle was built, we will never know what his plans were. Since that time, the castle has been through a lot. It was used as a state prison in the late 13th century, then became a refuge during a plague before falling into disrepair. During the 19th century, its interior marbles and furnishings were looted and repurposed for other building projects. The U.S. military used the castle as a secret navigational aid station amid the Allied occupation of Italy during World War II. This castle has seen a lot. In honor of the castle, it is on Italy's version of the 1-cent euro coin, and it's also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Number 8. Carvings of the Underworld. Excavations at the Yashkaya Rock Temple, a Hittite shrine in modern-day Turkey, have been ongoing for nearly 2 centuries. But it was only recently that archaeologists made a breakthrough interpretation of an ancient calendar and map of the cosmos carved into the stone. It looks like the Hittites believed in an underworld that exists beneath the Earth's surface. Carved into the limestone around 3,200 years ago, the artwork consists of over 90 depictions of animals, gods, and monsters. The images were first discovered in 1834 by French archaeologist and historian Charles Tessier. Now, 200 years later, researchers finally think they know what the etchings mean. They believe the carvings represent a creation myth consisting of the earth, the sky, and an underworld. Drawings of the sun and storm goddesses were placed higher than the pictures of so-called lesser people, and representations of the seasons and the phases of the moon. Another room contains a depiction of an underworld and imagery dedicated to the god of the sword. In addition to representing what one researcher described as a symbolic image of the universe, the pictures reflect cycles and rebirth, including changes in seasons as well as day and night. Created between 1700 and 1100 BC, the Yashkaya shrine embodies the Hittite society's beliefs about how the universe is structured and their spiritual views, including images of some of the 17 gods and goddesses that they worshipped. Calatrava la Vieja. Over the past few decades, archaeologists have discovered 4 separate treasure stashes at the ancient walled city of Calatrava la Vieja in Spain's Ciudad Real province. Nicknamed the City of 4 Hidden Treasures, the fortified medieval settlement was established around 785 AD. 2 of the hoards discovered there date back to the 9th century, during the age of the Muslim emirs in Spain. The other 2 troves date back to the 13th century. The first stash, which contained over 100 coins dating back to the 9th century, was discovered in 1960. Unfortunately for archaeologists, the farmer who found them sold almost all the coins. In 1995, a construction worker discovered the second hoard, which consisted of around 400 grams of silver coins from the Umayyad emirs of Al-Andalus and other Islamic dynasties. Archaeologists found the third trove of 71 coins dating between 1212 and 1217 during the reign of Alfonso XIII in 2004. But that's not all. The most recent find, uncovered in 2010, contains 29 coins that were minted between the end of the 12th century and 1264. The treasures were likely hidden during times of instability and perceived danger. At its peak, Calatrava la Vieja had an estimated 4,000 residents. The city fell into decline at the end of the 13th century amid decreased military importance as the war line between Christians and Muslims moved further south. Researchers describe these discoveries as evidence of how movable fortunes were hidden in secret places, and a reminder that not everyone who hid their treasure survived to retrieve it. The Lost Chu. Very little is known about the ancient Chu. According to Chinese legend, the first ancestor in the Chu royal bloodline was Zhu Rong, known as the god of fire. He acted as the advisor of Emperor Shun, in charge of observing the weather and everything related to fire, such as preventing forest fires and controlling burning grass. At the end of the Shang dynasty, Zhu Rong's descendants traveled south to the Henan province, where they established the capital of the Chu people at Danyang. From here, the kingdom expanded through the area, conquering many of the more primitive barbarians who were still living in China at that time. They called them barbarians. We don't know who they were. They then became one of the most powerful kingdoms in China for about 800 years, from 1030 to 223 BC. From what historians can scrape together, the Chu people were quite extraordinary. Not only did they believe in ghosts, but they also believed in magic and witchcraft. Like many ancient kingdoms of the time, they believed that death was merely a transition to another form of life. And much like other cultures at that time, the most important people in society were buried with precious treasures that they could take with them to the next world. Jade and bronze figures, musical instruments, bamboo scrolls, and more. They worshipped their ancestors, the legendary firebird phoenix, the sun, and the mountains. But after conquering many tribes of barbarians and ruling for nearly a millennia, the Chu kingdom was defeated by the king of Qin. He marched 600,000 soldiers on the capital and completely wiped them out. It was the beginning of Ying Zheng's plan to unify all of China under one banner. After the brutal defeat, the Chu kingdom collapsed and the culture vanished. City in the desert. Petra is one of the most magical places in the world, full of hidden secrets, and for centuries it was lost to the Western world. The city carved into the rock dates back thousands of years and was inhabited as early as 7000 BC. The city is made up of hundreds of houses, tombs, temples, obelisks, you name it. Even today, only 15% of the city has been uncovered, with the rest still hidden underground. Petra was once inhabited by the Nabateans, going back to the 2nd century BC. Very little is known about them or their society, but at some point when the Nabateans migrated to Petra, they became extremely wealthy and the city flourished. These people were so famous they were mentioned by many different civilizations, including the Greeks, Chinese, and Romans. Petra's inhabitants were used to living in the harsh desert climate and were great at harvesting rainwater and growing crops. When enemies came, they would disappear into the surrounding mountains. According to ancient origins, the Nabateans built their structures with the idea of secrecy in mind, so that few would realize the purpose and function of the structures. This protected the Nabatean water supply from invaders and strangers. Records show that many cultures were impressed by their ability to control water in the middle of the barren desert, and were well known for their agricultural abilities, as well as knowledge in engineering, astronomy, the arts, and building. They expanded trade routes, creating over 2,000 sites across all of the Middle East. The most famous temple, known as the Al-Khazna structure, was built during the 1st century AD, during which time the city's population peaked at around 20,000 residents. These ornate buildings seem out of place in the middle of the desert, where survival was difficult. Eventually, in 106 AD, Petra fell to the Romans after being a client state of the empire since the 1st century BC. The city's importance declined with the emergence of sea routes, and in 363 AD, an earthquake destroyed many of its buildings. After centuries of continuous decline, Petra was abandoned in the 12th century. It was forgotten about by the rest of the world until 1812, when a Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt accidentally found the city while traveling across the African continent looking for the source of the Niger River. He was the first European to see the city since the Crusaders hundreds of years before. The locals kept it a closely guarded secret, but Burckhardt wrote about the rock-cut tombs in his journal, and word got out about this lost city carved into the rocks full of possible treasures. Sadly, Petra's rediscovery led to considerable looting. Already damaged by age and the elements, the buildings fell further into disrepair, until excavations and preservation efforts began in recent decades. Archaeologists are hoping to learn more about the mysterious Nabateans as they work to excavate the rest of the city. Sarcophagus in an olive grove. For thousands of years, the story of the Trojan War was believed to be mostly myth, since much of it was written by Homer, who was a writer and a poet and liked to embellish things. Ancient historians questioned the account of the siege of Troy and how much of the epic story of love and war is actually real. Scenes from the battle have been found on artwork all over the ancient world, and even though the lost city itself was found in the 19th century, the details remain murky. In 2015 and 2016, archaeologists uncovered a marble sarcophagus dating back to the 2nd century BC. Taken from a necropolis known as the City of the Dead, located in northwestern Turkey, the place is constantly monitored by police to prevent thieves from stealing precious artifacts. A nearby olive grove has become the center of a lawsuit since it is an archaeological site, and there were rumors that illegal excavations had found something very interesting. Whoever found the sarcophagi removed them and took them to a museum. Now there is a fight as to who owns the artifacts, who has to pay for excavations, all kinds of problems, and now the woman that owns the olive grove has a major headache to deal with. While all of this is going on, the sarcophagi are now safe and sound, and historians examining them at the Iznik Archaeological Museum found that they had small statues depicting the warrior Achilles and the Greek king Agamemnon, as well as sculptures representing the spring, summer, and autumn seasons. The sarcophagi tell the story of the Trojan War. One has a relief of Eros with a lotus flower, and it's believed it was used for the burial of a queen. It is the only one of its kind ever found. Fiji's lost culture. Before the Europeans ever stumbled upon the island of Fiji, it was populated by the indigenous Fijians. These people practiced rituals at megalithic stone formations that they called naga. These were giant stone structures, kind of like the megaliths found throughout the UK. Only archaeologists are pretty sure they know what the Fijians used them for. Each naga had stone altars that the locals would use to perform rituals to promote fertility. They wanted to have many children, wanted their animals to have many babies, and their crops to grow. They also may have used these stone structures to communicate with their dead relatives in more secretive rites and rituals. The nature of these rituals has remained largely a mystery due to the extreme privacy of the families who performed them. Many ancestors of the tribes have almost no knowledge of them, other than that approaching certain areas would displease the gods. By the 1800s, Europeans had taken interest in the island for trade. The islanders had sea cucumbers that were seen as delicacies to Europeans, and they had sandalwood that was very valuable. Foreigners pretty much pillaged everything until the sandalwood was gone. Then, by the 1850s, the Kingdom of Bao had risen up to conquer most of Fiji, thanks to the Europeans trading muskets to the tribe. But the Kingdom of Bao's rule was short-lived. Roman Catholic missionaries washed over the island and turned the indigenous people into Catholics. Within just 50 years, Fiji was settled by Europeans. Their great stone naga were forgotten, and their ancient customs suddenly evaporated. Richard III's remains. King Richard III's short-lived reign from 1483 until his death in 1485 was full of controversy. He took leadership by force, stealing the crown from his nephews and eventually ordering their execution. The villainous ruler also had his own wife and brother killed, and became one of England's most hated monarchs of all time. Even Shakespeare made his disdain for Richard III known by portraying the king as a deformed hunchback, as a physical manifestation of the man's depraved mind. Richard III died in battle from 2 fatal blows to the back of his head. According to legend, his body was dumped into the River Soar. But actually, the truth is much more surprising. Under a parking lot in Leicester, archaeologists found the remains of the king. He had been buried near a church that no longer existed, and his grave had been forgotten about after the friary's dissolution and demolition in 1538. The age of the remains at death matched with Richard's age when he was killed, and a mitochondrial DNA analysis proved that the bones belonged to him. An examination showed that the disgraced king was suffering from a roundworm infection when he died. In keeping with the agreement to rebury the remains if they were found, Richard's body was laid to rest at Leicester Cathedral in 2015, following a funeral service. New human species. Nearly 90 years ago, in 1933, workers in the northern Chinese city of Harbin discovered a giant fossilized skull. The men who found it recognized its importance and decided to not say anything. Because the country was occupied by Japan at the time, one of the workers wrapped the skull and hid it in an abandoned well to keep it out of Japanese hands. Shortly before his death in 2018, the man told his grandson where the artifact was hidden. Chinese researchers recently determined that the skull is at least 146,000 years old, and that it belonged to a member of a previously unknown ancient hominid species, informally dubbed the Dragon Man, and scientifically named Homo longi. Measuring 9 inches long and over 6 inches wide, it is much larger than a modern human skull. It belonged to a man who was around 50 years old when he died, and who was equipped with a wide nose that enabled him to breathe with ease during heavy activity, according to a series of newly published studies describing the species. Researchers speculate that the man had a sturdy build that enabled him to survive the region's harsh winters at the time. The study's authors point out that the skull differs from all other known Homo species with its mix of ancient and modern features. For example, it has large square eye sockets, but is delicate despite its massive size, and is also long and low compared to the more rounded skulls of people today. Using advanced computer software, the team determined that the cranium and a few others that have been found throughout China form a new branch of the human family tree that was closer to modern humans than Neanderthals. Not all scientists are convinced that the Harbin skull represents a new species. Professor Chris Stringer of the Natural History Museum in London said that it resembles another skull found in 1978, which belongs to a species known as Homo daliensis. To all of us, potato, potato, because in the end, even he said that it was one of the most important finds of the past 50 years. Krilan Kala. This enormous temple mound complex and ceremonial center dates back to around 400 BC. Located in northwestern Uzbekistan, the site was built by an ancient society called the Khwarezmian dynasty, who ruled over the entire region when it was an oasis. The structures at the site are arranged in a circular pattern around a central building with fortified walls and 9 towers. Numerous dwellings are contained within the outer walls, which measure 285 feet in diameter. There is an inner circle with a diameter of roughly 138 feet, which may have been used as a burial ground for the civilization's rulers. Later people built a cult temple and shrine. The Khwarezmian dynasty was quite wealthy and boasted incredible architecture and engineering. There was a sophisticated sophisticated irrigation system that enabled people to live in the dry, barren region that would have otherwise been uninhabitable. The buildings here are unlike other known Khwarezmian structures, which are typically square and rectangular, but experts do not know why they chose a different style for this site. There are many things here that are a mystery. Excavations began during the 1950s and turned up various vessels, jugs, and plates bearing imagery of human heads, terracotta figurines, warriors, animals, and mythical creatures. Around 200 BC, a nomadic group called the Apasaka tribe destroyed the original temple complex, and at some point a fire destroyed the central temple, obscuring the history of Krilan Kala's original inhabitants. The settlement was rebuilt and remained in use until it was abandoned again around 400 AD. Today, the excavated portion of Krilan Kala is heavily eroded from decades of exposure to the elements, and local residents reusing building materials from the site. For now, our knowledge of the site is quite limited to just what archaeologists have been able to find. Botched seal. During the 13th or 14th century, an aristocrat in eastern England used a silver seal bearing an engraved design called an intaglio to sign and authenticate documents. Recently discovered by a metal detectorist in Norfolk, the badly burned seal was set with a Roman-carved gem. But according to experts, the person who used it was likely unaware of this. Inscribed with an image of a winged figure holding a spear, believed to be the Roman god Mars, the artifact's owner probably mistook it for being from the Mediterranean and the time of the Crusades, rather than from Roman Britain, according to Norfolk Finds liaison officer Helen Gaig, who spoke with the BBC. It's encased inside a silver seal matrix that would normally be flat, but is lumpy and rounded due to heat damage. Geek explained that seals like this were primarily used for authenticating or signing a document written by someone else. Because of the damage, the inscription is proving difficult to decipher, but someone with a seal like this was likely an aristocrat or someone high up. And while the person's identity is a mystery, at least for now, it's safe to assume that they were a baron, a bishop, or another member of the 1% at the time. This is the fourth seal matrix found in Norfolk out of just 50 that have been discovered worldwide, and this particular example is the only burned one, leading Geek to speculate that perhaps it was damaged by accident or in a forest fire. Either way, in her words, it's seen a lot of action. The Teso civilization. The Teso civilization literally burnt their own kingdom to the ground. It happened 2,500 years ago in what is now Spain. The capital of the kingdom held the same name as the civilization, Tartessos. It was a port city that emerged in the 9th century BC, and according to ancient texts left behind by the Greeks, was an almost mythical culture, extremely rich in both technology and resources. They mastered shipbuilding and metallurgy, they spread their cultural beliefs throughout the area of southern Spain, and then they vanished without a trace. In fact, Tartessos is believed to be the first recorded civilization in the Western Mediterranean. But how and why did the Tartessos civilization burn to the ground? Excavations at their ancient capital between 2014 and 2018 showed proof that the civilization vanished following one great big fire. There were events leading up to this great finale, what some archaeologists believe could have been a series of earthquakes and tsunamis that wiped out their coastal settlements. Whatever happened, it only took about 50 years. All of their small cities were destroyed to the point that all that remained was their capital. Now, nobody knows exactly what happened for sure. That being said, archaeological evidence suggests that the Tartessos kingdom burned down their own city after a great feast and dozens of animal sacrifices. These sacrifices included animals like horses and cows and dogs. All of these animals were brought to a single place and butchered just before the locals set fire to everything. It looks like they saw the end was nigh and wanted to go out with a bang. And from there, the Tartessos civilization disappeared. Long missing couple. One day in 1942, Marcelin Dumoulin and his wife Francine reportedly set off on foot to feed their animals in the Swiss Alps. They never returned to their home in the village of Saviez, and their 7 children were left to wonder what could have possibly happened to them. Custody of the kids was divided among several local families, and they had no choice but to move on with their lives. The couple's bodies were finally found in 2017, wedged into the crack of an alpine glacier 8,580 feet above sea level. A ski lift worker made the alarming discovery of what he initially thought were 2 black rocks, only to take a closer look and realize that he'd encountered a pair of human corpses. The bodies wore clothing characteristic of the period when the Dumoulins disappeared, offering newfound hope that the couple had finally been found. DNA testing confirmed that the remains belonged to the Dumoulins, who had only 2 surviving children by then. The findings also brought closure to the village, who had wondered about the couple's fate for the better part of a century. Ayutthaya. Roughly 40 miles north of Bangkok in what is now central Thailand, Ayutthaya was a Siamese capital and at one point one of the world's wealthiest cities. It was founded in 1351 by King Yu Thong, who fled there to escape a smallpox outbreak. The strategically situated metropolis sat on an island surrounded by 3 rivers that led to the sea, and flourished between the 14th and 18th centuries as a center of global diplomacy and commerce. During its heyday, Ayutthaya boasted gilded temples, palaces full of treasure, roads, canals, moats, and an advanced water management system. By 1600, an estimated 300,000 residents lived there, and it's believed that the population may have numbered over 1 million by the 18th century. Its glory days came to an end when the Burmese army sacked the city in 1767, causing the Ayutthaya kingdom, also called Siam, to collapse and its inhabitants to flee. Because many of the structures were made from wood, much of Ayutthaya's architecture was lost when the invaders set it on fire. All that's left of the ancient capital are the 50 or so stone relics and temples that survived the fire. Now a designated UNESCO World Heritage Site, the ruins consist of the reliquary towers or prang and large monasteries, which stand as a testament to Ayutthaya's former splendor. And now for number 6, but first want to say a big thank you to Tommy and Sean Meneses. Big shout out to both of you. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe before you go for more videos like these. Mysterious sacred structure. While excavating at Istanbul's historic Haydarpaşa train station recently, archaeologists discovered the ruins of what they describe as a mysterious structure, likely dating back to the 3rd century BC. Found beneath the station's walking platforms in the ancient city of Chalcedon, also known as the Land of the Blind, the building is shaped like an apse, a vaulted space usually in the shape of a semicircle. This feature is common among ancient churches, and experts believe that the roughly 2,500-year-old building is the oldest structure among those excavated so far, and that it was considered sacred to those who built and used it. In addition to the building, archaeologists found objects dating as far back as 6 BC, such as pots and coins, and an array of buildings, including one that may have been used as a warehouse and a collection of structures that could have been a small summer palace. Excavations at the site began in 2018 after the train station was closed for renovations. The discoveries are offering unprecedented insight into the ancient civilizations that once populated Anatolia and Istanbul. The land of Kush. The Great Kingdom of Kush is one of the most mysterious ancient civilizations in the world. The geographical location for the land of Kush is in modern-day Sudan, located just south of Egypt. We know today that the kingdom dominated this area of Africa from 2500 BC all the way to 300 AD. That's a massive amount of time, almost 3,000 years. This was a huge territory and a very powerful kingdom, one that erected even more pyramids than the Egyptians. And yet today, there is almost no mention of them anywhere in popular history. While the details are uncertain, according to religious traditions, the kingdom of Kush has been directly linked to Kush with a C, the grandson of Noah from the Bible. In the Bible, it's written that Noah's descendants lived throughout Northeast Africa, and considering his grandson was named Kush and the kingdom became known as Kush with a K, it's a pretty specific coincidence. There was a lot of engagement between the Egyptians and the kingdom of Kush. They traded, fought wars, and each one adopted fragments of the other's culture. In 1500 BC, the great pharaohs of Egypt marched south and conquered the Kush capital of Kerma, establishing their own forts and building their own temples. Egyptian rule continued until the 11th century BC, when a new era of Kush kings rose to power and took their land back. This kind of fighting went on until climate change caused drought and famine. At around the same time, the kingdom of Aksum rose in the south. By the 4th century AD, Kush had lost all its power. The Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire only ruled for about 300 years, and yet it was one of the most important kingdoms in India's history. In 1650, the Mughal Empire was a major power in the Islamic world. Aside from them, there was the Ottoman Empire, as well as the more recently developed Safavid Persian Empire. In 1690, the Mughal Empire controlled almost all of India, with a population of about 160 million people. They organized themselves based on a system developed by the legendary Mongolian leader later Genghis Khan. But this should be no surprise, considering the empire was founded by Prince Babur, who was descended from Genghis Khan on his mother's side. He conquered northern India in 1526, defeated the Sultan Ibrahim Shah Lodi, and then cemented the Mughal Empire's presence in the subcontinent. The Mughal Empire was responsible for building the Great Taj Mahal, an iconic image and major tourist site after the Emperor Shah Jahan's wife died in 1627. The Taj Mahal was built as a mausoleum in memory of his beloved wife, a labor that took nearly 22 years to complete in her honor. Like all empires, the Mughals eventually fell. There was a great revolt in 1672. The rulers lost much of their authority and began to lose certain regions, such as modern-day Afghanistan. And by 1707, the British showed up, and that was pretty much the end for the once great empire. An ancient well. Colin Steer from England had wondered about a dip in the living room floor of his home for years. When he retired in 2012, he finally decided to investigate. With a friend's help, he spent 3 days digging a 17-foot deep hole and found a medieval well dating back to the 16th century. Measuring 33 feet deep, the well was built by Sir Francis Drake for transporting water from Dartmoor to Plymouth, but had been covered up in 1895. Inside the well, Steer discovered a 16th century peasant sword. He installed lights inside the structure and built a trapdoor over it. The well is now the focal point of the man's living room and a famous topic of conversation among the neighbors. Would you want to have an old well in your living room? Let me know in the comments below. Steer's wife had discouraged him from exploring beneath their sagging floor years earlier, when they had 3 young children in the house. He had initially theorized that the unusual spot was a sinkhole, or had a body buried beneath it. Either one is not great for kids. Earlier this year, nearly a decade after he first started digging, Steer found a coin from 1725 in the well. He plans to continue digging in hopes of finding more artifacts. That'll keep him busy in retirement. Moche ruins. In early 2018, archaeologists announced the discovery of a ceremonial banquet hall and other artifacts, including human remains, that were left behind by the cryptic Moche culture from Peru. Estimated to be around 1,500 years old, the ruins consist of 5 raised pyramid-like adobe structures set upon platforms and 2 chambers, one which functioned as the banquet hall and another that was used for meetings. Chief archaeologist Walter Alva told National Geographic that Moche rulers used this structure for special celebrations and ceremonies. The banquet hall is decorated with large murals measuring as much as 32 feet long and featuring sea lions, fish, and other marine creatures. There are 2 thrones facing each other, one which the ruler would have sat on, and the other which sits lower and would have been used by the individual making an offering. The building was clearly intended for gatherings among Moche nobility, and it serves as the first physical evidence of these events besides scenes depicted in the culture's artwork. At some point, the structure was partially disassembled, covered up, and abandoned for unknown reasons. The collapse of the once powerful Moche civilization around 700 AD is also a mystery. It's possible that El Niño brought severe flooding from the nearby Sanya River, and that the extreme weather was the beginning of the end. But why they disappeared remains unknown. Reopened graves. All across Europe, archaeologists have noticed that around 1400 years ago, there was a tendency for people to reopen graves and take things out of them. Experts have long been trying to understand the reasons for this, and a new study suggests that it wasn't a spate of grave robberies like it may seem at first glance. An examination of previously excavated cemeteries from 5 regions throughout Europe confirmed that this trend went on between the 6th and 8th centuries. People were selective about which items they took and favored brooches and swords, while often leaving behind other valuables, including objects made from precious metals like silver and gold. Strangely, people also often took items that were in poor condition and had no monetary value or practical use. The team wrote that graves were typically reopened within a generation of being buried, after the deceased individual's soft tissue had decayed, but before their wooden coffin collapsed. The researchers speculated that people's reasons probably varied, but the items that they took likely had symbolic value, perhaps as heirlooms to be passed down from one generation to the next. This tradition peaked during the 7th century, but largely died out before the 8th century. Although the study offers fresh insight and a solid starting point for further exploring the custom, the exact reasons behind it remain a mystery. Stolen artifacts found. In May of this year, Italian police announced that fragments from 6 frescoes that they believe were stolen from Roman villas in and around Pompeii during the 1970s have been returned to Italy. 3 of the pieces, which date back to the 1st century and depict a cherub playing a flute, a dancing woman carrying a tray, and a woman's head, were taken from the ancient coastal city of Stabiae, which is located roughly 2.8 miles southwest of Pompeii, and it was also buried in ash when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD. The artwork was smuggled across international lines into collectors in the United States, Britain, and Switzerland during the 1990s. A cultural protection squad working under Italy's Carabinieri police seized the frescoes last year as part of a larger investigation into stolen and trafficked archaeological goods. The other 3 frescoes were seized in 2012 after police caught the thieves illegally excavating them red-handed from a villa in Civita Giuliana, which sits just a half-mile northwest of Pompeii. Inside the same villa, where excavations began in 2017, long after thieves had tunneled their way in, archaeologists discovered the remains of 2 victims of the eruption, who they believe were a master and his slave. To law enforcement and experts alike, the return of the ancient works to their rightful place is cause for celebration, especially amid heightened efforts to combat artifact smugglers. A whale in Vermont. While building a railroad in the small town of Charlotte, Vermont back in 1849, a construction crew unearthed a beluga whale skeleton. The discovery immediately raised the question of how the remains of a marine creature turned up in a farmer's field 200 miles from the nearest ocean. Known as the Charlotte whale, it's one of several whale carcasses that have been found in the landlocked state of Vermont. At a lack of other explanations, some people attributed discoveries like these to Noah's flood. But there is a more scientific explanation to this mystery based on the theory of glaciation and ice ages, which Swiss geologist and biologist Louis Agassiz had developed roughly a decade before the Charlotte whale was discovered. Between 12,500 and 10,000 years ago, the modern-day Champlain Valley was submerged by a prehistoric body of water called the Champlain Sea. The melting glaciers that formed the lake had pushed the ground below sea level under their enormous weight. Over the next several thousand years, the land gradually rose to its current level, ending the Champlain Sea's existence. Thought to be an adult, the Charlotte whale measures roughly 12 feet long. Its gender is unknown. Although radiocarbon dating is impossible due to the preservation techniques that were originally used on the bones, scientists believe the whale lived between 11,500 and 11,000 years ago. Takht-e-Soleiman. Built around a crater lake in northwestern Iran's West Azerbaijan province, Takht-e-Soleiman, or the Throne of Solomon, is a fortified complex dating back to the Sasanian Empire. Originally built during the 5th century as a Zoroastrian fire temple, the site is thought by many to be the birthplace of Zoroastrianism, the Sasanian state religion. The complex sits over 6,500 feet above sea level in a remote valley surrounded by volcanic mountains. It was further developed during the 13th century under the Ilkhanid ruler Abaka Khan, who used the site as his summer home. His architectural plan was based on the ruins already in place, and Khan saw the location as an opportunity to establish the Ilkhanid dynasty's legitimacy. At the height of the empire's power, the region became its political headquarters. It was here that the previously nomadic Ilkhanids settled while partially continuing their on-the-go lifestyle and integrating their traditional customs rooted in Eastern Asia into their new region's culture. This combination was reflected in Takht-e-Soleiman's architecture, including its polygonal structures, dragon motifs, and a plan bearing overtones of the Mongol headquarters in China. The site's history of human habitation is thought to date back before the original temple was built, perhaps as early as 500 BC. Due to its remote location, Takht-e-Soleiman often goes overlooked on travelers' itineraries, but those who have been there say it's worth a visit, citing the ancient settlement's mysterious and almost spooky appeal. A lost village. French and Spanish historical records dating back to the 1560s mention a Native American village called Sarabay in what is now northeastern Florida, but its location has long evaded archaeologists, that is, until now. Researchers from the University of Northern Florida have just announced the discovery of what they believe is the long-lost settlement at the southern end of Big Talbot Island. Expanding upon previous excavations that were carried out during the late 90s, the team found over 50 pieces of early Spanish pottery and indigenous pottery dating back to the late 16th or early 17th century, as well as burned corncob fragments and bone, stone, and shell artifacts. The site was occupied by a Mokama-speaking Timucua tribe who lived along northern Florida's Atlantic coast and were among the first Native Americans to encounter Spanish colonizers when they arrived in 1562. Further investigation is needed to confirm that the settlement is, in fact, Cerebi, and the team hopes to find houses and public architecture as they continue to explore the site over the next 3 years as part of the UNF Archaeology Lab's ongoing Mokama Archaeological Project. Mysterious runes. While examining a cow bone dating back to the 7th century in the Czech Republic, archaeologist Alina Slamova noticed some unusual scratches. Upon further inspection, experts identified the markings as Germanic runic letters. The discovery upended the previously held belief that the Slavic alphabet was not used until the 9th century, leaving archaeologists shocked. These runes could change history. They do not know who carved the inscriptions, but a new study suggests that the author was a Slav who had learned the Germanic alphabet, or someone from a Germanic tribe living in a Slavic region. Expert Robert Nadoma identified the writing specifically as Elder Futhark runes, a 24-letter alphabet that was used from the 1st to the 7th centuries by German-speaking peoples of Central Europe. In an official statement, the scholars clarify that the bone contains no specific message, but instead bears the alphabet's last 7 letters and contains several mistakes, suggesting that it was a learning aid. Tensions between Slavic and German people have continued into modern times, making the discovery especially significant. It has given rise to increased animosity between the two groups today, and proposes the very realistic possibility that literacy was achieved in the Slavic world much earlier than previously thought. At the very least, researchers hope that this leads to further discoveries of runic lettering that will help them fill in critical gaps of its history. The Cucuteni Tripilian culture. The Cucuteni Tripilla culture, also known as the Tripolier culture, dates back all the way back to 5500 BC. That's over 7,500 years ago. They prospered in Eastern Europe for just under 3,000 years. Their territory spread from the Carpathian Mountains all the way south to Moldova, encompassing huge areas of western Ukraine and Romania. These people weren't exactly part of a kingdom, but instead a society of loosely connected Neolithic settlements. They all belonged to the same culture, but they were massively spread out. Despite this, the Tripolier culture is responsible for building some of the most impressive settlements in Europe before true civilizations took root. Some of the first villages contained anywhere from 20,000 to 46,000 people. But what's really strange is that most of their settlements had a maximum lifetime of 80 years. They would burn their settlements to the ground and then rebuild somewhere else. And despite obvious archaeological evidence of this, historians have no idea why they did it for thousands of years. They literally destroyed their cities just about once every century just to move and build a new city a few miles down the road. Neolithic buildings. In 2012, workers were astonished to find the remains of a prehistoric building at the planned site of a new housing complex in Monmouth, Wales. Measuring at least 50 feet long, the foundations of what appear to be a meeting house date back an estimated 6,500 years, possibly making them older than the Egyptian pyramids. Nothing like it had ever been found in Britain. Made with 3-foot-wide tree trunks, the structure likely sat next to an ancient lake that no longer exists. Speaking with the Daily Mail, archaeologist Steve Clark admitted that the building may date back to the Bronze Age, but that the team believed it was much older, perhaps from as far back as the early Neolithic era. He also conceded that they were unsure what the structure was used for, but that it probably housed a family and may have functioned as a gathering place. Another impressively old discovery was made in Monmouth in 2015, when archaeologists identified a building called a crannog, which was elevated on poles over a lake that dried up during the first millennium BC. Dating back to the Neolithic age, the nearly 5,000-year-old structure was built before the advent of metalworking. Crannogs are thought to represent symbols of power and status among the area's Stone Age populations. The one found here was built atop a prehistoric burnt mound of discarded stones and pebbles that were heated and dropped into pots to boil water. The presence of at least 4 burnt mounds in different layers of the site indicates that the settlement was successively inhabited for hundreds or thousands of years, according to Clark. Once covering nearly the entire modern-day town of Monmouth, the prehistoric lake formed around 11,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. The people who lived alongside it built boats and may have used it to access the sea and travel across the English Channel to northern Europe. Aora Caves. The Aora Caves consist of around 100 freestanding multi-level rock-cut monasteries, chapels, and temples that were carved into a high basalt cliff in what is now India's Maharashtra state. Situated within the western Ghats mountain range, the site bears evidence of 3 distinct building phases. The first period started sometime between 550 and 600 AD, and was characterized by the establishment of Hindu monuments, followed by a Buddhist phase lasting roughly from 600 to 730 AD, then a later Hindu and Jain period between 730 and 950 AD. The site's most significant feature is the world's largest monolithic structure, Kailasa Temple, which is dedicated to Lord Shiva. Altogether, its builders removed around 220,000 tons of rock to create the temple. Another important structure is the Carpenter's Cave, a Buddhist worship hall that was built around 650 AD and features a 15-foot Buddha statue in a seated preaching pose. Ellora fell into disuse when the area fell under Islamic rule during the late 13th century, according to records from the time. And while only 34 of the caves are open to the public, evidence shows that people have visited the site regularly throughout its history. Sadly, the monuments were substantially damaged between the 15th and 17th centuries, when Muslim armies destroyed the region's religious icons in a practice known as iconoclasm. 9,000-year-old tools. Around 9,000 years ago, a group of ancient people left behind a collection of stone tool artifacts in Lake Huron. A new study found that the items were made from obsidian that was sourced from a quarry over 2,000 miles away, in what is now Central Oregon, making them the oldest examples of Western obsidian ever found in the United States. Ashley Lemke, an assistant professor of sociology and anthropology at the University of Texas at Arlington, told SciTech Daily that the artifacts reveal the far-reaching social connections that existed across North America long ago, stating in her own words, "These are very small pieces that have very large stories to tell." Divers retrieved the objects from an undisturbed underwater site as part of a broader investigation into what life was like for a group of caribou hunters toward the end of the last ice age. They were deposited on dry ground when water levels were much lower and became submerged as glaciers melted. Lemke pointed out that the study emphasizes the importance of underwater archaeology and how these sites tend to be well preserved compared to those on land, giving researchers unprecedented opportunities to examine the past. Burial in a bed. Archaeologists at Kozani in northern Greece recently revealed the surprising discovery of the bed and remains of a wealthy 1st-century woman bearing ties to the god Apollo. Uncovered between 2018 and 2020, it constitutes the first known discovery of a preserved bed in Greece, as well as the first time someone has been found buried in this fashion. The bed survived for thousands of years, mainly because it was made from bronze. It had wooden components which deteriorated by the time it was discovered. Last year, archaeologists constructed a replica of the bed, complete with the missing parts. This fascinating discovery confirms that ancient Greek people were buried in their beds. The identity of the woman remains unknown, but it's evident that she was wealthy or perhaps even a royal, due to the array of luxury items found buried with her and the golden laurel leaves on her head. She died when she was middle-aged, and if she wasn't rich, it's likely that she was a religious authority of some sort. Parts of her bed were adorned with mermaid heads, as well as an aquatic bird with a snake in its mouth, which is a symbol of the god Apollo. The leaves on the woman's head were also likely symbolic of Apollo, who is characterized by the laurel tree and leaf. Ongoing tests should reveal the woman's age and cause of death, and archaeologists are currently working to create a life-sized replica of her bed. The Urartu. Archaeologists in modern Turkey have been making some pretty incredible discoveries in regard to the lost Urartu kingdom. For 5 years, archaeologists have been investigating the remains of the Urartu in the Van province. Specifically, they've been digging at Kavustepe Castle, which dates back to around 3,000 years ago. Another incredible monument that has withstood the test of time is the Van Fortress, built between the 9th and 7th century BC. The fortress is home to inscriptions carved across 2 generations of kings, King Darius and then Xerxes. The archaeologists most recently uncovered burials containing the remains of Urartu citizens from 2,750 years ago. These bodies were found in old and forgotten necropolises, buried until now under layers of dirt. But just who were the Urartu? They were a kingdom that rose up in the Iron Age and lived high in the mountainous regions of northern Turkey, Iran, and Mesopotamia. They came onto the scene in the middle of the 9th century BC, wielded a massive political power throughout the Middle East for 300 years, and then were suddenly gone. All that remains today are a few ruins, including the mysterious Kavustepe Castle high up in the mountains. It was used a lot during the Middle Ages, and it holds a lot of information that scientists are trying to uncover. There are all kinds of hidden rooms, niches, inscriptions, buried pots, remains of sacrificial animals, all probably used to honor Haldi, the god of war. The greatest mystery of all is what happened to the Urartu. Some historians say it was probably the neighboring Assyrians or the Scythians, the Sumerians or the Medes. They had many enemies who wanted nothing more than to wipe them out. Mayan murals. Lucas Acicona Ramirez, who lives in the Guatemalan village of Chahul, decided to renovate his home in 2003. As he chipped away at the outer layer of plaster on the walls, he uncovered a brightly colored mural. Turns out that hiding behind his walls was a vivid Maya mural. The artwork depicts figures wearing a mix of Spanish and traditional Maya clothing and engaging in what appears to be some type of ceremony. Suspecting that he had found something of historical significance, Ramirez contacted a local archaeologist who passed news of the discovery on to other experts at a university in Poland. Archaeologists said that the images are difficult to interpret due to the mix of European and indigenous clothing. They said that it looks as though the figures are dancing and carrying something in their hands. Although the team believes these objects might be human hearts, they don't know for sure. After being exposed to air for the first time in centuries, the murals have faded significantly. Consequently, the team had to race against the clock to study them and verify information that Ramirez provided them with, a difficult task in a country where many documents were destroyed in recent decades due to warfare. Guatemala is home to the largest surviving Maya population, and experts believe there are more wall murals waiting to be discovered. The artwork found in Ramirez's kitchen represents a unique blend of pre-Columbian and European colonial elements that is not seen in most other Maya paintings. The city of Ur. The ancient Sumerian city-state of Ur is famously mentioned in the Bible as the place that Abraham left when he relocated to Canaan, but many people don't realize that it was, in fact, a real place, and that it became prosperous and significant in its own right as a major trade center before it was mentioned in Scripture. Founded in 3800 BC, or perhaps even earlier in what is now Iraq, the powerful Persian Gulf port city was home to as many as 80,000 residents at its peak. Ur was continuously inhabited until around 450 BC, when the population deserted the city due to the effects of climate change and overuse of the land, and migrated northward to more fertile territory. An Italian explorer rediscovered Ur in 1625, when he traveled through the area and found bricks and other artifacts bearing strange inscriptions. At the time, the city's ruins were buried beneath the sand. In 1922, British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley excavated Ur's ruins, which were largely reduced to rubble. The most visible surviving remnant of the city is a partially restored ziggurat, which was unearthed during the 1930s. Originally built during the 21st century BC, the structure was rebuilt during the 6th century BC by Babylon's last king, Nabonidus. The coastline has changed over the centuries, and what little is left of Ur now sits much further inland than it did during its heyday, when it was situated near the coast and the mouth of the Euphrates River. While the city's ruins are helping archaeologists gain a better understanding of the culture, their knowledge is admittedly limited to the artifacts and ruins available at the site, leaving the once powerful city of Ur somewhat of an enigma. Decapitated bodies. In May of this year, archaeologists announced the discovery of 17 decapitated bodies at 3 Roman cemeteries in Cambridgeshire, England, a number they describe as exceptionally high. Dating back roughly 1,700 years, the headless remains were found among 52 graves at a site called Nobbs Farm. The victims consisted of 9 men and 8 women who were all older than 25 when they were killed. A recently published paper describes how some of them were kneeling when they died, and in many cases, the person's severed head was placed between their feet, and pottery was placed where their head would usually be. Some of the deceased were buried on their stomachs. The team that excavated the site believes that the beheaded individuals were executed for violating Roman law. During the 3rd and 4th centuries, when they were buried, there was a noticeable increase in capital crimes, and punishments against violators became harsher. Evidence suggests that the site was used as a supply center, and that violators may have met with swift, life-ending consequences. In the article, the researchers wrote that the number of crimes that carried the death penalty increased from 14 to 60 between the beginning of the 3rd century and Constantine's death in 337 AD, due to heightened security concerns. The time period saw several civil wars throughout the Roman Empire as people competed to become emperor, and so-called barbarian attacks were also on the rise. Despite being put to death, some of the individuals were still given a somewhat dignified burial complete with valuable grave goods, and their families were allowed to request the return of their body, according to lead archaeologist Isabel Lisboa. She added that these people were probably not slaves, because slaves were not afforded any official status and were not given proper burials or grave goods. Not all experts agree with the findings. Simon Cleary, professor emeritus of Roman archaeology at the University of Birmingham, told Life Science that if decapitations increased along with stricter laws, they would be found throughout the Roman Empire. But these burials are almost entirely exclusive to Britain, suggesting that they were carried out as a deterrent mechanism for anyone who might be thinking about breaking the law in a distant place where the law was difficult to enforce from the empire's headquarters. Roman Gladiator Arena. Last summer, archaeologists discovered the remains of a Roman-era theater in the ancient city of Masara, located in modern-day Turkey's Aydın province. The 1,800-year-old structure once seated as many as 20,000 spectators, but is now mostly underground, according to project survey leader Mehmet Umut Tansır. The team that made the discovery first noticed sizable stonework sticking out of the ground. They got to work excavating the building and protecting it from nature and the elements, and meanwhile dated it to around 200 AD. The arena was built during the Severan dynasty, which encompassed 5 emperors and spanned from 193 to 235 AD. For the most part, the structure is well preserved, with some rows of seats, the building's supporting walls, and the arena where gladiators fought remaining intact. It was smaller than the Colosseum, with 82-foot-tall walls and a central arena measuring 131 by 98 feet. Masara was very developed and rich at the time, thanks to Roman administrators who focused on the city's economic growth, according to the study's authors. The increased variety and volume of Masara's coins during that time period are a testament to its growth. Along with these improvements came the arena, where visitors placed bets on gruesome gladiator and wild animal fights. For those who could afford it, there were entertainment rooms for private spectators, and the building also had waiting rooms for the gladiators. It's the only known theater of its type ever found in Anatolia. Consequently, it attracted spectators from neighboring cities and all around. For now, the team's goal is to clean and preserve what's left of the arena, then to do geophysical surveys to better understand the parts of it that remain underground. The Etruscans. The Etruscans flourished in Italy hundreds of years before Rome was even founded. They showed up in the 8th century BC and vanished in the 3rd century BC. This was the original Italian kingdom that was ultimately destroyed and then assimilated into what became Rome. But believe it or not, the Romans adopted a lot from the Etruscans, including their clothing, their religious beliefs, and even their architecture. There are plenty of Etruscan tombs, statues, temples, and examples of art still standing in Italy today. The Etruscans are considered Italy's first great civilization. Before Rome, the Etruscans were banded together by a common language, religion, and culture. However, they weren't really under a single rule. All the cities in ancient Etruria were independent states. They each had their own ruler and developed independently of one another. They developed their own manufacturing, art, and everything else. Coastal cities evolved at a faster pace, and the whole region prospered from trading with each other. All that trading and prosperity came to a dramatic halt in the 3rd century BC. Up until then, Rome had been the friendly little neighbor. But as Rome became more powerful, it began to flex its muscles. The Etruscans were first invaded by a northern Celtic tribe, with the attacks going on for somewhere around 200 years. In 280 BC, when Rome finally defeated all the major cities of the Etruscans, there was nothing they could do except crumble and submit to the great Roman Empire. A Queens Hairpin. While excavating a communal toilet at the Fontainebleau Palace outside Paris in 2012, archaeologists found a hairpin among the ancient sewage. The 3.5-inch long gold piece featured interlocking seas and a green and white finish, which are the design and colors of the 16th century French queen, Catherine de' Medici. Famous across Europe for her lavish jewelry, Catherine was Queen of France from 1547 to 1559. Very few pieces from her extensive jewelry collection have ever been found, making the discovery especially significant. It's unusual that the hairpin was found in a communal toilet, which Catherine would not have used. The artifact may have been stolen and dropped into the latrine, either by accident or by someone wanting to get rid of the evidence. Archaeologists admitted that they can do little more than speculate about why and how the royal piece of jewelry appeared in such an unroyal place. Tulamela. Between the 13th and 17th centuries, the city of Tulamela thrived in what is now the northern end of Kruger National Park in South Africa. Excavated during the 1990s, the 22-acre site consists of several stone enclosures that sit on a hill. Anthropologist Lynn Meskel wrote in a 2007 study that Tulamela's inhabitants lived in a stratified society, with elites living at the top of the hill and everyone else occupying the lower levels. An estimated 1,000 people lived high up and around 2,000 resided below. The city received its name from modern researchers. In reality, nobody knows what its residents called it. A park ranger rediscovered the settlement in 1983, but it was not properly investigated until the 1990s, after the country's racially divisive apartheid system ended. Excavations yielded the remains of porcelain, glass beads, and other objects that were traded from as far away as China, demonstrating Tulamela's far-reaching connections with other civilizations, including in North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Burials at the site belonging to a man and a woman were found to contain gold necklaces, bangles, beads, and other jewelry, suggesting the pair were of royal status. Tulamela's residents also crafted bronze, iron, and copper artifacts. Some of these items resemble objects found at other archaeological sites, including Mapungubwe, located in northern South Africa, and Great Zimbabwe, now found in modern-day Zimbabwe. For reasons unknown, Tulamela was abandoned during the 17th century. In the years leading up to then, the city remained prosperous but was drying out, according to a research paper on the site. Various factors, including increased Portuguese influence and civil war, likely contributed to Tulamela's demise. Scotland's oldest animal carvings. Between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago, during the Bronze Age, someone carved images of 2 red deer and 3 smaller 4-footed animals on the underside of a capstone covering a burial chamber in what is now Kilmartin Glen, Scotland. First discovered in the 1860s, the burial chamber contained the cremated remains of around 10 people, as well as a sharpening stone, axe, flint knife, and other artifacts, according to Historic Environment Scotland. But the etchings went unnoticed until recently, when archaeologist and aerial photographer Hamish Fenton spotted them during a visit to the site. This site is also the only known archaeological site in Scotland that contains animal etchings and cup and ring markings, which consist of a central circle surrounded by concentric rings. There are over 3,000 prehistoric carved rocks in Scotland, with most of them being the cup and ring markings created by striking the rock surface with a stone tool. The presence of both types of carvings presents questions about their relationship to one another and what meaning they held. Prehistoric deer carvings are rare throughout the UK. Most carvings are geometric and not really figures, but the recently discovered carvings are uncharacteristically detailed, leaving no questions about which species the deer represent. This discovery has completely changed the way historians look at rock art in the UK and gives us a small glimpse into the mind of the artist. The home of Harriet Tubman's father. Last year, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service purchased a 2,600-acre plot of land on Maryland's eastern shore for conservation purposes. Known as the Peters Neck property, it's part of the Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, which has lost over 5,000 acres of land to rising sea levels since it was established in 1933. This particular area, however, is projected to remain above sea level at least until 2100. Additionally, officials speculated that the property might contain the home of Harriet Tubman's father, Ben Ross. And they were right. In late April, archaeologists announced that they had discovered the site. Located near the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Visitor Center, the 10-acre parcel of land was bequeathed to Ross by his enslaver, Anthony Thompson. Ross received the land and his freedom in the 1840s, 5 years after Thompson died, according to the slave owner's will. It is here that a young Harriet Tubman, then named Araminta Ross, learned some of the valuable navigation skills that she used for escaping and helping escaped slaves reach freedom along the Underground Railroad. A team of archaeologists began digging last November, and after getting off to a frustrating start, they found a half-dollar coin from 1808, the same year that Ben Ross and his wife married. Although the home's foundation was missing, they uncovered numerous other 19th century artifacts that helped them identify exactly where Ross lived, including nails, brick, glass, dish fragments, pottery, and a button. The discovery was made just in time because although the land is predicted to remain above sea level for some time, it's not immune to the effects of climate change, and there's a good chance that it will soon become a marsh. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania was an extremely powerful kingdom in Eastern Europe from between the 14th and 16th century. Before then, Lithuania had been a bunch of loosely banded tribes. As the Teutonic and Livonian knights from Germany became a threat, the Lithuanian tribes united and formed a Grand Duchy. It was imperative for these people to stand together and protect Lithuanian lands from the advancing German knights and their allies. At the time, the Germans were busy trying to defeat everyone in sight. They had already conquered a massive part of Russia, pushing down into the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania held off the Germans until the late 1500s. At that point, they had to go to Poland for help. The Polish king forced them to become a part of Poland in exchange for protection. The two created a union. Lithuania adopted the Polish customs and their language and basically became a part of Poland. This was from between 1569 until the end of the 18th century, when the Russian Empire took Lithuania for itself. Lithuania did not become its own individual kingdom again until the 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed and they could finally once again have independence. A boat in the desert. In 2016, a well-preserved wooden boat was found buried in the ancient Egyptian necropolis of Abu Sir. Discovered in the tomb of a high-ranking official, the 4,500-year-old vessel's planks and ropes were still intact, making it one of few Egyptian boats ever found in decent condition. Made from expensive cedar and measuring 60 feet long, the boat is unusually large and lavish for the burial of a non-royal member of society. But an even bigger question is, what was it doing in the middle of the desert? For one, Abu Sir is situated near the Nile River, which the Egyptians made great use of for transporting goods and people. Boats became increasingly important throughout the 4th dynasty for their role in international trade and were symbols of state power, according to Douglas Inglis of Texas A&M University. Boat burials were fairly common at certain points during Egypt's Old Kingdom period. It's unknown whether the vessel found at Abu Sir was actually used for sailing. Experts don't know how exactly why the Egyptians practiced boat burials, but they believe that the watercrafts may have been built to serve the deceased in the afterlife, or during their owner's journey to the underworld. Bagan. Located in Myanmar's Mandalay region, Bagan is an ancient city that served as the capital of the Bagan Kingdom, a Burmese dynasty responsible for unifying the regions that comprise modern-day Myanmar. Founded in the 2nd century AD, Bagan peaked between the 11th and 13th centuries. By then, there were over 10,000 Buddhist temples, pagodas, and monasteries spread across the surrounding plains. In addition to being the empire's designated capital, Bagan was also a major political, economic, and cultural center, with a heavy focus on secular and religious studies alike, including languages, philosophy, grammar, astrology, and more. Religion dominated the local culture, which harbored unusually fluid views containing elements of numerous belief systems, including various schools of Buddhism and Hinduism, as well as animism. Repeated Mongol attacks throughout the region led to Bagan's collapse in 1287. Although the invading armies inflicted minimal physical damage to the city, they effectively reduced the population from anywhere between 50,000 and 200,000 to the size of a small town. Following the empire's fall, the Mayan Kingdom became the ruling power in Burma. Several of Bagan's temples continued to serve as pilgrimage destinations, but most were neglected and fell into disrepair. The region is an active earthquake zone, and in 1975, a major earthquake destroyed many of the temples beyond repair. The government attempted to restore some of the damaged structures during the 90s, but its efforts were met with widespread criticism from experts who accused authorities of failing to consider the original architectural styles. Another earthquake struck in 2016, causing significant damage to around 400 temples. Some 2,200 structures remain today, and Bagan is a major tourist destination and one of Myanmar's only 2 designated UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Ancient Island Settlement. Advancements in technology are making it easier than ever for archaeologists to explore sites and artifacts without excavating. One recent example is the discovery of a 6,000-year-old Neolithic settlement along the Croatian coastline by archaeologist Mate Parica, who first noticed the site while examining satellite imagery. He saw it and thought, maybe it's natural, maybe it's not. Located off the eastern shore of the island of Korčula, the settlement merely looked like a large, shallow area on the seabed at first glance. With the help of a colleague, Parica went diving at the site where he found what he believes to be an ancient village, dating back to around 4500 BC. When it was built, it sat on a narrow strip of land that once connected Korčula with the mainland. The submerged settlement contains the ruins of the stone walls that once surrounded it, as well as stone tools and other everyday items, including ceramic objects and flint knives. Speaking to Reuters, the local museum curator said that the village's location on a small islet is very unusual. Plus, most Neolithic finds have been made in caves, since this is where they usually lived, and the conditions in caves has helped to preserve everything. It's certainly possible that similar sites exist but haven't been discovered yet, since finding lost cities underwater is not easy, especially if they are thousands of years old. Here, thankfully, the islands in the area acted as a barrier between the settlement and the heavy waves of the Mediterranean Sea, protecting it from destruction. Ancient tools. Located in South Africa's northern Cape Province, Wonderwerk Cave is full of clues about our prehistoric past. Here, there is evidence that human ancestors were crafting stone tools as far back as 1.8 million years ago. The tools were found in a layer of sediment within the cave that also contained animal remains and fire remnants. Using several dating methods, experts determined that the shift from simple Old Owen stone tools, such as sharp flakes and objects used for chopping, to more complex objects like basic hand axes, occurred around 1 million years ago, which is also when our ancestors were first known to deliberately create fire. Wonderwerk Cave is quite possibly the oldest known home that was inhabited by early humans. First excavated in the 1940s, it contains a plethora of artwork and other artifacts reflecting a long history of use by our predecessors. And these discoveries are helping researchers piece together the little-understood timeline of human evolution and migration, as well as how these things relate to climate change. The Gandhara. The Gandhara kingdom has been extinct for a very long time. They lasted from the 6th century BC to the 11th century AD. At 1700 years, the length of time the Gandhara existed is pretty impressive. They really hit their stride in the 5th century AD, under the rule of the Buddhist Kushan kings. This was when the kingdom controlled huge parts of northwestern India, and what is today Pakistan, and much of eastern Afghanistan. It was an interesting kingdom because they were located at the crossroads of east and west, two very different cultures. It was a bizarre fusion of Greek and Buddhist beliefs, especially following the invasion of Alexander the Great into northwestern India. In fact, the Gandharan city of Taxila was one of the only places in the ancient world that was important in both Hinduism and Buddhism, while still being influenced by things happening as far away as the Mediterranean. But all the fun and games came to a great end when the Huns showed up in 450 AD and captured the entire kingdom. They didn't just take one city, they conquered the entire kingdom. And because these are the notorious Huns we're talking about, they didn't care at all about the unique convergence of cultures. They didn't adopt any of it, and instead tried to destroy everything. After 450 AD, the cultural uniqueness of the Gandhara kingdom was gone. So too were all of its people, tragically wiped off the map. Persian Cup in Siberia. While monitoring the melting permafrost on Siberia's Gaidan Peninsula in 2016, a team of scientists discovered a fragment of a medieval bronze cup that came from what is now Iran. Speaking with the Siberian Times, researcher Andrei Gusev said that Iranian artifacts from the Middle Ages had been found in western Siberia, but never this far north, let alone beyond the Arctic Circle. Along with the cup, the team unearthed a ceramic pot and a bronze knife handle. Researchers believe that the cup was made sometime during the 10th or 11th century and brought to Siberia around 200 years later. Found roughly 2,300 miles from where it was manufactured, the artifact is a testament to the vast trade networks that existed in a world that, to us, seems much smaller in the absence of modern technology. Asian merchants appeared in the Upper Kama region of modern-day Russia during the 6th and 7th centuries. The indigenous Khanty and Mansi peoples placed a high value on Persian imports. They assigned ritual meaning to the objects, keeping them in holy places and offering them as gifts to gods and spirits. They also used Persian dishes during festivals to serve ceremonial foods to the gods. It's entirely possible that more of these artifacts will appear as the permafrost melts, reflecting an extremely rare benefit that comes along with the world's changing climate. Thanks for watching! If you'd like to learn about more archaeological discoveries in surprising places, let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time! Bye!